So today we're going to talk a little bit about the legislative branch in particular. We'll talk about the United States Congress. But what I would like for you to do is to look at this building here. This is the Capitol building. This is in Washington, D.C. This is the symbol of the legislative branch. When people often talk about certain laws that are being made, they'll immediately allude to the Capitol building. In the Capitol building, meaning where the legislature meets. A couple things here. Of course, we have the dome. Um, on the left-hand side, this is where the House meets. This is where the Senate meets. Um, yeah, well, so just a real quick review here, and we've kind of, if you remember, we had talked about this earlier at the national level, and really it works this way at the state level, except for like one example. Well, really not even one example, but at the national level, we have the legislative branch, there's the executive branch, and we have a judicial branch. So the legislative branch, which is what we're going to concentrate on here, is represented by Congress. And if you remember, it's the legislative branch that makes the laws. So it's broken up into two chambers, both the House and the Senate. And then we don't need to go through those right now, but I just wanted to make sure that you have a clear understanding. One thing we can do though, the legislative branch makes the laws, the executive branch carries out or enforces the laws, whereas the judicial branch judges or decides what the laws mean and should the laws be obeyed. If we move forward here, just a quick review as well. How did we get to this place? We got to this place by, first of all, if you remember, there was the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. Virginia plan called for bicameral legislature. Bicameral means two chambers. Bi means two. But the big key difference is each house would have depended on the population. New Jersey said, yeah, we're a smaller state. That's not really fair to us. How about a unicameral legislature where it's going to be equal representation? Ultimately, what they do, they have this compromise, the Great Compromise, or also the Connecticut Compromise. But it provided for the House, which each state is represented by according to its population. So, for example, Indiana has about 6 million people, so we have 9 representatives, 9 House members. Wyoming only has 600,000 people. They only get 1. Every state is guaranteed at least 1. So even if they only have 5 people in it, they still get 1. The Senate, that is kind of the upper house. Each state gets 2 members or 2 senators. This satisfied the New Jersey plan. And so here is equal representation. So based upon population, based upon representation. And both houses must pass. So they both must agree on the same legislation for a law to pass. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Okay, here's the House chamber. So this is where the nation's business takes place. And what you'll notice is, so there's a big dais up top. And if you've ever seen the State of the Union address, when the president comes in and speaks to the nation, it's usually like late January or early February. So he walks down this aisle, and everybody's cheering and greeting him and trying to touch him and shake his hand and be seen on camera. And actually, and this will be missing, they take this out, but the president speaks from right here. The vice president sits there because he's the president of the Senate, and the Speaker of the House sits right here. So they're the 2 leaders of the chambers. Supreme Court usually will sit up front, and there's members of the cabinet sit over here as well. But anyway, so this is where the business takes place. Now there's an upper chamber, or like an audience up here where you can move through. If you've ever been to Washington D.C., you can spend like 5 minutes in there, and you got to be really quiet. And so this is where they come and they vote. They vote. Um, they hear proposals. They hear please, you know, please don't do this. Please do this. Yada yada yada. So who's the leader? Well, first of all, it's John Boehner, and he's a Republican from Ohio, and actually from like the Columbus area. So he's kind of, he kind of represents Midwest values, but he kind of comes from a very conservative background, which is kind of strange because his dad was a bar owner, so he kind of grew up in a bar, and so. But if you remember back to when we talked about um, people and kind of their political affiliation, small time business owners tended to be a little bit more conservative. So he kind of grows up in that conservative, um, you know, framework. A couple things about John Boehner. He's been Speaker of the House for, let's see, he defeated Nancy Pelosi maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago almost now. Um, his nickname is kind of the Tan Man. He is always really, really tan. And as you look at this picture, this is actually a picture of him being really young. Um, this office really kind of ages you. Uh, but he's always really, really dark. It's like even the deepest of winter, he kind of has this orange hue to him. Um, but what's his basic job? His basic job is to run the House. So the majority party, in this case, the Republicans have a majority of members. Um, the majority essentially gets to elect who the leader is going to be. In this case, it's John Boehner. Now, the majority leader, so this is kind of like the leader of the Republicans. Even though he is a leader, even though he is a Republican, he really speaks for the whole House. But this Republican, oh, I forgot to mention. So whenever you see names of like members of government, they'll always have like, especially in the legislative branch, they'll have this parenthesis afterwards, and it'll be like our Republican from Ohio. As we move forward, here's Kevin McCarthy. He's a Republican from California. So Kevin McCarthy, he's the majority leader, so he represents all the Republicans within the House. It's his responsibility to keep his group together. That's called a caucus. A caucus is a group of like-minded people. So the Republican caucus, he is in charge of. Excuse me. The majority whip is Steve Scalise, and what his responsibility is to make sure all the Republicans vote according to Republican principles, that they don't kind of, vote with the Democrats ever, or uh, so it's a tough position. But as you kind of work your way up the leadership hierarchy, everybody must serve in these capacities early on. He's a Republican from Louisiana. And notice, very Republican areas. So the minority leader is Nancy Pelosi. She's kind of famous for a couple of things. First of all, she's a Democrat from California, and she's actually from the San Francisco area, so one of the most liberal areas in our country. She was the first female Speaker of the House. So before John Boehner, when the Democrats were in control, she was the Speaker. So she's the one who helped pass the Affordable Care Act. So if she was not the Speaker of the House during that time, it would not have occurred. So she needs to get a lot of credit for this. Her job is, again, just like the majority leader for the Republicans, her job is to keep her caucus in line. The minority whip, that's Steny Hoyer. He's a Democrat from Maryland. These guys have a lot of power behind the scenes. You don't see them a lot, although you'll see like the people that I've shown, they tend to, during news conferences and stuff, are always standing behind, their leadership. But You don't really hear a lot about their behind the scenes maneuvering. The Senate chamber, as you can see, looks very, very similar to the House chamber, except, of course, that there's going to be less desks. As we add states or take away states, I don't think we'd ever take away a state, but as we add states, they have to add in more desks. Excuse me, I just yawned there. Now, so the majority leader, the Republicans just took it in 2014. This is Mitch McConnell, a Republican from Kentucky. He is a plotter. He just kind of slowly and but surely, gets things done, and he talks real slow. But don't let that fool you, because he is a freaking pit bull. He gets things done. You'll notice that the leadership is not very representative of society. We haven't had a black or Hispanic Speaker of the House. We haven't had, in the major leadership positions, black or Hispanics. So, I mean, there's still some work to be done there. The minority leader then is Harry Reid, and he's actually retiring once his term is up. But he's a Democrat from Nevada. I should say Mitch McConnell is a Republican from Kentucky, very, very conservative. Whereas Harry Reid is a Democrat from Nevada, which is kind of interesting because Nevada can be a Democratic state, but it's also a Republican state. So he kind of has to be a little bit more middle of the road. But, he just had a huge fall over the winter where he fell and cracked his head, and now you'll see him in news conferences. He has to wear sunglasses. His eyes were swollen for months. I mean, he had a horrible injury, and he's decided to finish out his term and then retire. So, but he's kind of a bulldog as well. He looks kind of mild mannered, but oof, these guys, they are nasty. Hope this helps.